the feeling of having absolutely no power, it's unbearable. It isn't just annoying.
Right. It's a deeply physical sensation.
It is. It is this profound feeling of helplessness that it sits right there in your stomach.
It creates this massive cognitive dissonance for us as humans because we are helpless in those moments.
Yeah.
But we naturally have ambition. We want to shape the world around us, but the world just keeps shaping us instead.
Exactly. And the source material we are covering today makes this really aggressive argument that because that feeling of powerlessness is so terrible, everyone, you, me, the person listening to this right now, we all want more power.
We crave it.
We crave it constantly. But here's the catch. We live in a modern world where we are forced to hide that desire behind a mask of, decency and fairness.
I mean, think about it. If you walk into a strategy meeting at your job and just announce, I want to control everyone in this room and bend you all to my will.
You are definitely not getting promoted.
No, you're not a leader at that point. You are a sociopath. You're out.
Right. You get fired immediately. So we are all stuck in this paradox. We have to play a game to get what we want in life, but we have to completely pretend we aren't playing a game at all.
Which is exhausting.
It is. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we aren't just summarizing some generic business book. We're really unpacking what a lot of people have called the manual for reality. We are talking about Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
And we have to acknowledge right up front, this is probably the most polarizing book in the nonfiction canon. Bar none?
Oh, absolutely.
I have heard people call it a guide for sociopaths, a handbook for evil, the most dangerous book ever written. But on the flip side, I've heard Fortune 500 CEOs and serious historians call it the most honest book ever written.
And that is exactly the tension we're living in for the next hour or so, because the premise of the book is aggressive right from the jump. Greene essentially argues that power is a social dynamic. It's like gravity.
It's just always happening.
Always. It is happening at your family Thanksgiving dinner. It's happening in the local PTA meeting. And it is definitely 100% happening in your workplace Slack channels.
And his fundamental argument there is that you cannot opt out. You just can't. You can say to yourself, I'm not playing politics. I'm just here to do my job.
But Greene would say
that by saying I'm not playing, you're actually just playing the game very, very badly. You are making yourself a massive target for the people who actually are playing.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to strip away the moral judgments we usually place on human behavior just for this discussion and look at power purely as a mechanic, as a game with very specific rules.
Right. Good and evil take a back seat today.
Exactly. We're going to look at what he calls the courtier's dilemma, which explains why your office feels like a royal court. We are going to completely dissect Law 1, which is all about the fragile ego of your boss, and Law 2, which is this really counterintuitive look at why your friends are actually your biggest liabilities.
And the sources provide some incredible, dramatic historical stories to back those up. We've got a really bloody betrayal in the Byzantine Empire, a brilliant, clever bribe in ancient China, and this lavish party in 17th century France that went so incredibly wrong it completely destroyed a man's life.
And the goal here, for you listening, is to move from being what Greene calls a bungler, someone who basically hurts themselves by being incredibly naive, to becoming an artist of power.
And I think it's important to note, an artist doesn't have to be a villain. That is a really key distinction in the source material. An artist simply observes. An artist deeply understands the medium they are working in.
And in this case, the medium is just human nature.
Precisely. Human nature in all its messy glory.
So let's start with the philosophy of the game. The preface of the book. Greene opens this section with a quote from Machiavelli that really, I think, sets the stakes for everything that follows.
It does. Machiavelli wrote, "Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good."
Which is, let's face it, a very cynical starting point. It basically says nice guys finish last, but with a lot more Renaissance flair.
It is cynical, but if you look at the cold logic of it, it makes sense. If you enter a negotiation or a new relationship or a corporate hierarchy with complete 100% transparency.
Showing all your cards?
Right. You show all your cards, you act purely on charity and goodwill, and you assume everyone else in the room is doing the exact same thing. If you do that, you are wildly vulnerable to anyone who is willing to hide just one single card.
You are bringing a hug to a knife fight.
That's exactly it. Greene argues that power is about leverage, it's about perception, and it's about strategy. But as we know, there's a huge group of people who completely reject this worldview.
The people who say they don't play politics.
Yes. Greene categorizes them as non-players. And this is where the source material gets really psychologically fascinating, because he argues these so-called non-players are actually often the most manipulative people in the room.
I found this part so interesting because we all know these people. He breaks them down into 3 specific types. Let's run through them because I guarantee the listener is going to recognize some of their colleagues here. The first one he identifies is the moralizer.
We all definitely know a moralizer.
Yeah.
This is the person who frames absolutely everything in terms of justice or fairness or piety. They aren't just disagreeing with you on a tactical strategy. They are disagreeing with you on a moral level.
Like, I don't care about the promotion, I just care about equity, or I'm only doing this for the good of the team.
Exactly.
But Greene says this is actually a power move.
It is a massive power move. Think about the dynamics there. By constantly claiming the moral high ground, they are forcing you down into the low ground. If they have positioned themselves as the objectively good person, by definition, you are the bad person if you dare to disagree with them.
Wow.
It is a very effective way to inflict guilt. And guilt is one of the most powerful weapons you can use to control human behavior.
So it is essentially passive-aggressive dominance. It is using virtue as both a shield and a sword.
It's weaponized virtue. They gain power by making everyone else around them feel inferior or ethically compromised. It's brilliant, but it's totally a game.
Okay, then you have the second type of non-player, the equalizer.
The equalizer is the person who demands that everyone be treated exactly the same. No favorites, no superstars, no special treatment.
Which on the surface sounds incredibly democratic. It sounds nice.
It sounds wonderful. But Greene suggests we need to look much closer at who is actually making that demand. Very often, the person shouting the loudest for absolute equality is the person who lacks excellence themselves.
Oh, that makes sense.
If everyone is treated exactly the same, regardless of their actual output or talent, the mediocre worker is completely safe. The high performer, on the other hand, is capped. They can't rise above the pack.
So they use the concept of equality to level the entire playing field down to their own ability.
Exactly. It is a defensive strategy designed to hide incompetence. If I know I can't rise to your level of excellence, I need to use social pressure to pull you down to my level.
That is a very dark take on modern office culture, but it honestly tracks. And what about the third type, the naive?
The naive are the people who are genuinely innocent. They aren't trying to manipulate you like the other two, but they act entirely on emotion. If they are happy, they scream. If they are mad, they yell.
No filter.
Zero filter. They honestly believe that if they're just completely authentic at all times, the universe will reward them for their honesty.
Which is funny because I feel like modern culture constantly tells us to be this exact person. You know, live your truth, be your authentic self, bring your whole self to work.
And Greene would argue that is absolutely terrible advice if your goal is survival and power. The naive person is incredibly dangerous to be around because they are completely unpredictable.
Because they just react.
Right. You cannot build a strategy around them or ally with them because they don't even know what they are going to do next until they feel the emotion. They crash around the court like a loose cannon. They might not have bad intentions, but they constantly obstruct power because they fundamentally don't understand consequence.
They are the proverbial bull in the china shop, just wandering around, wondering why everyone is so upset about all the broken plates.
That's a great way to put it. Greene says that while they might be innocent in their intent, they are horribly effective at causing total chaos for everyone else.
So if we aren't supposed to be moralizers, we aren't supposed to be equalizers, and we definitely shouldn't be naive, what is the ideal state? How are we supposed to act? This brings us to the central metaphor of the entire book, which I think is brilliant. The courtier.
The courtier's dilemma. Greene draws this really vivid parallel between the modern corporate boardroom and the old aristocratic courts of Europe. Think of the court of Louis XIV, or the Medicis in Italy, or the Borgias.
When you picture that, you picture powdered wigs, silk stockings, deep bowing. It all looks very proper and elegant.
On the surface, absolutely. It was the height of aesthetics. But underneath all that silk, it was a pit of vipers. The absolute rule of the court was what Greene calls the velvet glove. You had to be the absolute height of civilization. You couldn't just draw a sword and kill someone who annoyed you. That was strictly forbidden.
You'd be executed.
Right. So you had to smile. You had to pay compliments. You had to be witty and charming. But, and here's the iron hand inside the velvet glove, you still had to utterly destroy your enemies to survive. You just had to do it politely.
So the modern dilemma is basically, how do I remain perfectly polite, civilized, and democratic on the surface while also being completely ruthless and effective underneath?
Correct. You must be, as the source describes it, congenial yet cunning. If you are too overt with your power, if you act like the office bully, the group will eventually exile you because you are disrupting the peace. But if you are too soft, the sharks will eat you. So you have to master indirection.
Indirection, like a bank shot in a game of pool.
Precisely. You never go straight at the target. You maneuver. You use influence. You get exactly what you want without anyone ever realizing you were the one who actually pulled the strings. And the prerequisite for this, the absolute baseline skill you must have before you can do any of this, is emotional control.
Greene is so specific about anger in the preface. He seems to absolutely hate it.
He views anger as a total, catastrophic loss of power. Anger is a tell. It reveals your weakness to everyone watching. It shows that you have lost perspective and that things are getting to you. In the mechanics of power, if you can make someone else angry, you control them. But the second you get angry, they control you.
Because it completely clouds your vision. You stop seeing the chessboard and you just focus on the piece that offended you.
Exactly. You get tunnel vision. He also introduces this concept of the Janus face.
That's the Roman deity with two faces.
Right. One face is always looking back to the past, and the other face is looking forward to the future. Greene says the true master of power is never actually stuck in the present moment. Most people live in what we could call tactical hell.
Tactical hell, meaning just reacting to things as they happen.
Yes. Reacting to the email that just pinged on your phone, reacting to the slight comment someone made in the meeting 5 minutes ago. You are just swatting at flies. The power player is operating on a completely different timeline. They look to the past to learn the history of the game and the mistakes others have made, and they look to the future to anticipate the next 3 moves. They are never just reacting to the present.
I have to say, it sounds genuinely exhausting, living like that, constantly calculating.
Oh, it requires immense discipline. It is not easy at all. But Greene's counterargument would be that the alternative is being a helpless pawn in someone else's game. Pick your poison.
Fair point. And there's one last foundational concept before we dive into the specific laws. Deception. The source takes a very, very interesting, almost contrarian stance on lying and deception.
He really does. We are all taught from childhood that lying is a sin, it's bad. But Greene argues that the capacity for deception is actually what separates humans from animals. He frames it as a civilized war. To him, being able to wear a mask, to completely hide your true intentions from the people around you, is a sign of high intelligence and immense self-control.
So he doesn't see it as a moral failing.
Not at all. It's not about being a malicious liar, it's about being an actor. It is about controlling the display you present to the world, rather than just letting your internal state spill out everywhere.
Okay, so that sets our philosophical foundation. The world is a court. We are all courtiers. We need to wear the velvet glove, control our emotions, and master indirection. Now let's get into the specifics. Let's talk about Law 1.
Law 1. Never outshine the master.
This one sounds so simple, almost obvious, but the more I read the source, the more I realized people mess this up constantly. I think it is the law people violate the most, especially early in their careers.
Oh, without a doubt.
You get a new job, you get hired, and you really want to prove your worth, right? So you try to dazzle the boss. You want to show them exactly how smart you are and justify why they hired you. You think, look at this incredibly innovative idea I have. Look at how fast I solved this legacy problem.
And that instinct is the absolute death knell for your career.
But why? I think a lot of listeners might struggle with this. Why wouldn't a boss want a brilliant, dazzling, high-performing employee? Isn't that the whole point of a company?
Because your boss is human. And the dominant, overriding human emotion in any hierarchy is insecurity. When you shine too brightly, you do not inspire admiration in your master. You inspire fear.
Fear that you're going to replace them.
Exactly. They worry you are coming for their job. They worry that they look dim or incompetent by comparison to your brilliance.
So by genuinely trying to impress them, you are actually directly threatening their ego.
And an insecure master is an incredibly dangerous master. Greene uses a tragic, incredibly cinematic story from 17th century France to illustrate this point perfectly. It's the story of Nicolas Fouquet.
This story is wild. It seriously reads like a Hollywood movie script. Set the scene for us. The year is 1661.
It's 1661 in France. Louis XIV is the king. But we have to understand the context here. At this specific point in time, Louis is not yet the legendary Sun King we all know from history. He's only 22 years old. He's quite young, unproven, and he is just stepping out of the shadow of his powerful advisors who basically ran the country for him.
So he's feeling a bit insecure about his actual authority.
Very much so. He's also known mostly for being a bit of a playboy, not necessarily a serious, iron-fisted ruler yet.
Okay, and his finance minister is this man, Nicolas Fouquet.
Nicolas Fouquet. And Fouquet is a brilliant, brilliant man. He's famously generous. He loves lavish parties. He loves beautiful women. He loves poetry and art. He is undeniably the boldest, smartest, most charismatic guy in the room. And he fully expects that the king is going to name him prime minister.
But the king goes a different direction.
Right. Louis decides to completely abolish the position to prime minister and declare that he will rule France absolutely alone.
Which makes Fouquet very nervous. He thinks he's falling out of favor with this young king.
Yes. So Fouquet decides, I need to win the king back. I need to solidify my position. And his grand strategy is to show the king just how incredibly valuable, well-connected, and deeply loyal he is. He decides to throw a party in the king's honor.
But not just a dinner party.
No, this is the party to end all parties. It is held at Fouquet's newly constructed, breathtaking private chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte. He invites the young king and the entire French court. And the source material describes the sheer sensory overload of this event in such lavish detail.
Paint that picture for us because the details matter here.
We are talking about an unprecedented 7-course dinner. And it featured exotic foods from the Orient that had literally never been tasted in France before. There was original music commissioned and written specifically to honor the king. After this incredible dinner, they all take a stroll through Fouquet's private gardens that were so meticulously designed and beautiful that they actually inspired the design of Versailles years later.
And then there's a play, right?
Yes, a brand new play by Molière, who was the greatest playwright of the era. It was written exclusively for this single occasion, and Molière himself acted in it to entertain the king. And then, to cap the entire night off, a massive explosive fireworks display over the chateau.
It sounds absolutely amazing. If I were a guest at that party, I would be thrilled. I'd think Fouquet was the greatest guy ever.
And the guests were thrilled. Everyone was walking around whispering to each other, Fouquet is amazing, what incredible taste he has, look at his immense wealth. But Louis XIV, he was quietly seething the entire night.
Because he felt shown up.
Completely shown up. Fouquet was stealing the spotlight that belonged to the king. Louis looked around this magnificent estate and saw a subject who was richer, more cultured, and clearly more popular than he was.
So Fouquet's intent was to say, look what I am doing for you, sire. Look at my loyalty.
But the effect was totally different. Louis just saw a massive rival flaunting wealth that he immediately suspected must have been stolen from the royal treasury. How else could a mere minister afford this?
He felt small.
He felt totally eclipsed by his own servant. So the party finally ends. Fouquet probably went to bed that night thinking, I absolutely nailed it. The king loved it. My job is safe.
And the next morning.
The very next day, Fouquet was arrested by the captain of the Musketeers, D'Artagnan. By the way, the actual historical figure. He was charged with massive embezzlement.
And what was his punishment? Did he just lose his job?
No. He spent the next 20 years of his life in solitary confinement in a cold fortress high up in the Pyrenees Mountains. He eventually died in that cell.
That is just brutal. 20 years in solitary, basically just for throwing a party that was a little too good.
It perfectly illustrates the law. His intent was loyalty and affection. The effect was the severe humiliation of the master. He outshone the sun, and he was burned for it.
Okay, so that is a terrifying example of the transgression of the law. That's the don't. But what is the do? How are you supposed to navigate a boss who might be insecure without just dumbing yourself down and sabotaging your own career?
You have to become a mirror. You have to take your brilliance and use it to reflect their glory back onto them. And the counterexample Greene gives for this, the observance of the law, is Galileo.
The famous astronomer.
Yes, Galileo Galilei. He was in a really tough spot financially in the early 1600s. He desperately needed constant funding for his scientific research, and the way things worked back then, he was constantly having to beg different wealthy patrons, the Duke of Gonzaga, the Medici family, just giving them all these little scattered gifts. He'd give one a military compass he invented. He'd dedicate a book to another.
It sounds like an exhausting gig economy, but for Renaissance scientists.
That's basically what it was. And he was barely scraping by, always looking for the next patron. But in 1610, he makes this massive, world-changing discovery. He points his newly improved telescope at Jupiter, and he sees 4 moons orbiting the planet.
Which is a huge scientific breakthrough.
Unbelievably huge. But Galileo is smart. He realizes he can use this discovery for something much more practical than just pure science. He needs long-term funding. So he decides to turn this astronomical discovery into a cosmic event specifically tailored for the Medici family.
But how do you gift a moon to a rich family?
It's pure marketing, genius marketing. He publicly announces that these bright new stars, the moons of Jupiter, have miraculously revealed themselves to his telescope at the exact same time as Cosimo II de' Medici's coronation.
Wow. Timing is everything.
And he goes further. He says the number of the moons, there were 4 of them, perfectly corresponds to the number of the Medici brothers.
He is literally creating a divine mythology for them.
Exactly. He even commissions a special emblem. It shows Jupiter, which represents Cosimo I, the founding father of the dynasty, sitting grandly on a cloud with 4 stars constantly circling him, representing his 4 sons. He essentially tells the Medicis, the heavens themselves are reflecting the eternal glory of your family.
That is incredible. He didn't just give them a cool compass or a book. He gave them a dynastic legacy written directly into the stars.
He made the master shine. By linking the Medici family to Jupiter, the Roman king of the gods, he made them look infinitely powerful and divinely ordained. He made them bigger than life.
And the result of this massive, flattering gesture.
He was immediately appointed as the official court philosopher and mathematician to the Grand Duke with a very comfortable full salary. No more begging for grants. He was financially set for the rest of his life.
The contrast between those 2 stories is so sharp. You have Fouquet, who basically said, look at me, look how grand I am, and he got a lifetime in prison. Then you have Galileo, who said, look at you, look how grand you are, and he got tenure and wealth.
That is the pure essence of Law 1. If you are genuinely smarter or more talented than your boss, you sometimes have to act a little naive. Ask for their help or their advice, even if you don't need it. If you come up with a brilliant, game-changing idea, find a creative way to frame it in the meeting so it looks like it naturally evolved from their great guidance or a previous comment they made.
The source uses a really beautiful image for this concept, the stars in the sky.
Yes. In any given system, there can only be one sun. If you try to shine as brightly as the sun, you just obscure its light, and the sun will eventually remove you to clear its view. You need to willingly be the background stars that make the sun look even brighter.
Okay, let's pivot to Law 2. And I think this one hits a little closer to home for a lot of people listening. It's titled, Never Put Too Much Trust in Friends, Learn How to Use Enemies.
This is a really tough pill to swallow, because as a society, we value friendship so incredibly highly. It's a virtue. We tend to think, if I start a new business, I should definitely hire my best friend. I know them, I trust them.
Right. You already have a shorthand, you know you get along well. It feels like the safest possible bet.
But Greene forcefully argues that is exactly why it is the most dangerous thing you can do.
Unpack the psychology there for us. Why does the source say friends are so dangerous in a power dynamic?
He breaks it down to 2 main human flaws, envy and ingratitude. The source explains that you actually don't know your friends as well as you think you do. Friends naturally hide their true feelings to avoid conflict and keep the peace. They might have been secretly envious of your success for years, but they will never say it to your face.
Okay, I can see that. But why does the specific act of hiring them make that hidden envy worse?
Think deeply about the dynamic that is created when you hire them. If you give a friend a job, you are essentially doing them a massive favor. You transition from being their peer to being their benefactor, and this creates a hidden, toxic dynamic of condescension. Greene uses a great phrase for this: oppressive gratitude.
Oppressive gratitude. That's a heavy term.
It is. The friend desperately wants to believe they earned this new job entirely on their own merit and skill. But deep down in their gut, they know the truth. They know they got it because they know you. And that secret knowledge eats away at their pride. It breeds a slow, quiet resentment. They start to feel like you own them, like they are in your debt forever. And eventually that resentment ferments into outright treachery.
So the friend actually becomes the one who stabs you in the back, not because they are evil, but because they are just tired of feeling constantly indebted to you.
Precisely. They need to tear you down to reclaim their own ego. And the case study Greene uses for this law is incredibly gruesome. It is the story of Michael III of Byzantium and a man named Basilius.
The transgression again, let's hear it.
So Michael III is the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. One day, he is visiting the royal stables, and a wild, unbroken horse gets loose. It is rearing up and is just about to trample the emperor to death. Suddenly, a young groom, a peasant horse trainer named Basilius, jumps in, subdues the horse, and saves the emperor's life.
It's a classic hero moment.
It is, and Michael is overwhelmingly grateful to this young man. He decides he is going to raise Basilius up from nothing. He showers him with lavish gifts. He promotes him to head of the royal stables. He even sends him to the finest schools to be educated. He essentially takes this rough peasant and turns him into a highly sophisticated, wealthy courtier. They become completely inseparable best friends.
He's basically giving him the full pretty woman treatment.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But here is where the psychology goes wrong. Basilius just gets greedy. He suddenly has everything a man could want, but he didn't actually earn any of it through his own cunning or skill. It was all handed to him. So he starts to desire even more power. He decides he wants to run the military. So he goes to Michael and convinces him that the emperor's own uncle, a very capable man named Bardas, is secretly plotting a coup against him.
Is the uncle actually plotting anything?
No, not at all. Bardas is loyal. But Michael trusts his best friend, his savior Basilius, implicitly. So Michael agrees to have his own uncle murdered based on a lie. Basilius carries out the assassination himself, and with Bardas out of the way, Basilius takes control of the army.
And Michael still thinks this guy is my absolute most loyal friend.
Right up until the bitter end. Sometime later, Michael gets himself into some serious financial trouble, and he desperately needs a loan. He asks Basilius, who remember is now incredibly wealthy, entirely because of Michael's generosity, he asks for the money. Basilius just refuses. He looks at the emperor with total disdain.
The mask finally slips?
Completely. And a few weeks after that refusal, after a night of heavy drinking, Michael wakes up in his bedchamber surrounded by soldiers. Basilius is standing right there watching. The soldiers violently stab the emperor to death. Then Basilius casually declares himself the new emperor and literally rides through the streets of the capital with his former best friend's head displayed on a pike.
Wow. From saving his life from a horse to cutting off his head, that is an insane escalation.
The profound lesson Michael completely failed to learn is that you simply cannot buy loyalty with gratitude. The debt he placed on Basilius was just too heavy for a proud man to carry. Basilius subconsciously felt he had to completely destroy his benefactor just to free himself from that crushing feeling of perpetual obligation.
The source mentions a really striking fable here that I think sums up the danger of gratitude perfectly. The peasant, the snake, and the heron.
Oh yes, it's a stark little story. The snake is being relentlessly chased by hunters. It slithers up to a farmer and begs for help. The farmer takes pity on the snake and lets it hide down in his own belly to escape. When the danger finally passes, the farmer asks the snake to come out, but the snake refuses. It's warm and safe in there.
Talk about severely overstaying your welcome.
Definitely. So a heron sees this happening and tells the farmer to squat down and strain to forcibly eject the snake. The farmer does, the snake pops out, and the heron immediately strikes and kills the snake. The farmer is saved, but the farmer is suddenly paranoid. He's worried the venomous snake might have left some poison inside his stomach. So he asks the heron what to do. The heron says, "You must cook and eat 6 white fowl and you'll be totally cured."
And what's the punchline?
The farmer looks at the bird that just saved his life and says, "You're a white fowl." He grabs the heron, snaps its neck, cooks it, and eats it.
That is so incredibly dark.
It is dark, but it perfectly illustrates Greene's point.
Yeah.
True gratitude is exceptionally rare in nature and in humanity. Self-interest is always the dominant operating system.
Okay, so friends are treacherous snakes, and gratitude will get you eaten. Got it. But what about the second half of that law? It says, learn how to use enemies. How do you use someone who explicitly wants to harm you?
This brings us to a brilliant example from China, around 959 AD. The story of Emperor Sung.
This is the observance of the law.
Yes, and the historical context is absolutely crucial here to understand why his move was so genius. China had been stuck in this brutal state of civil war and fragmented kingdoms for decades. It was just a continuous bloody cycle of military coup. A powerful general would murder the current emperor, violently take the throne for himself, and then a few years later, his own subordinate generals would murder him and take over. It was a literal conveyor belt of murder.
So Sung finally becomes emperor. He manages to grab the throne, but he knows exactly how this game ends. He knows he is statistically next on the chopping block.
He knows it for a fact. And he knows that his so-called friends in the army, the other powerful generals who fought alongside him and helped him get power, they are ironically his biggest threat. They are the ones with the troops, the ambition, and the proven means to kill him.
So what does he do? How does he break the cycle?
He does something shocking. He invites all these dangerous generals to a grand banquet at the palace.
Usually in ancient history, if a new ruler invites all his rivals to a banquet, it means a massacre is about to happen. Very Red Wedding style.
Exactly. And the generals know this. They are absolutely terrified. They sit down at the table, convinced they're going to be poisoned or ambushed. But Sung does something completely different, something brilliant. He dismisses the guards, pours the wine himself, and offers them a deal. He says, look, life is short. We spend every single day in total fear of each other. It's exhausting. Why don't you all just willingly give up your military commands, retire to beautiful countryside estates, and I promise I will give you all the incredible riches, land, and companions you could ever want.
He essentially bribes them to quit. He buys their ambition.
He completely neutralizes them with overwhelming kindness and luxury. He turns the hungry wolves into fat, happy lambs. And they all agree. They gladly take the deal and retire to lives of pleasure. The cycle of coup is instantly broken.
That handles his dangerous friends. But what about his actual declared enemies, the rival armies he was fighting?
There was a specific rebel king named Lu who had fought bitterly against Sung. When Lu's forces were finally defeated and he surrendered, absolutely everyone at court expected Emperor Sung to have him brutally executed. That was the standard procedure. Instead, Sung shocked everyone by giving Lu a very high-ranking, respected position in his own royal court. Shortly after, Sung invites Lu to have a private glass of wine.
Again with the wine. Lu must be sweating bullets thinking it's poison this time.
He is terrifyingly sure it is poison. He starts openly weeping, begging for his life. He says to the emperor, I dare not drink this. I know what it is. Emperor Sung just laughs, takes the glass from Lu's trembling hand, and drinks the entire thing himself. There is no poison.
That is such an unbelievable power move.
It completely shattered Lu's psychological resistance.
Yeah.
In that moment, Lu realized that Sung actually trusted him, or at the very least, Sung was so powerful that he wasn't the least bit afraid of him. From that day on, Lu became the emperor's most fiercely loyal and effective servant.
And there is that famous Abraham Lincoln quote that the source drops in here, which fits the dynamics so perfectly.
Yes. Lincoln was asked why he didn't just destroy his rebellious enemies, and he replied, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?
It is so much more politically and strategically effective than just killing them. If you kill them, you have to deal with their angry supporters. If you convert them, you gain their skills.
And it is actually safer. Greene argues that an enemy who is spared and given an unexpected second chance has something massive to prove. They know they are on very thin ice. Therefore, they will work twice as hard, they will be fiercely loyal, and they will constantly strive to show you they are worthy of that second chance. A friend, on the other hand, often just feels entitled to your favors. An enemy feels lucky.
So the tactical, everyday advice for listener here is hire based purely on competence, not on your personal affections or friendships. Maintain a healthy professional distance. And if you have active enemies or rivals in your field, don't just spend all your energy trying to crush them. Look for ways to co-opt them.
Bring them into the fold. And Greene even takes it a step further. If you look around and realize you have absolutely no enemies at all, he suggests you might actually want to carefully make a few.
Wait, intentionally make enemies? That sounds counterproductive.
Or at least find a clear rival to compete against, because competition sharpens you. If you are only surrounded by comfortable friends and yes men, you get intellectually lazy. A clearly defined enemy gives you focus, it keeps you alert, and it forces you to constantly improve your game.
That is a fascinating perspective, and it leads us really nicely into looking at the broader landscape of the book. We have only deeply covered the first 2 laws today, but there are 46 more. And honestly, just scanning the table of contents, it reads like a master menu of psychological warfare.
It really does. And as you read through them, you start to see very clear thematic patterns emerging across all the laws.
Let's just hit a few of the more provocative titles from the source, just to give the listeners a flavor of the broader toolkit Greene provides. Starting with Law 3, conceal your intentions.
This one ties directly back to what we discussed in the preface about deception. The goal is to keep people constantly off balance. If your rivals or your boss don't actually know what your end goal is, they cannot possibly prepare a defense against you. You guide them down the wrong path with a smokescreen, and by the time they realize what you're really doing, it's too late.
Then there is Law 4, which is one of my favorites. Always say less than necessary.
This is such a powerful one. The core idea is that truly powerful people speak very little. The more words you use, the more common and ordinary you appear, and the exponentially higher the chance becomes that you will accidentally say something foolish or revealing.
Right. Silence makes people incredibly uncomfortable.
Exactly. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human conversation. If you stay silent, the other person will almost always start nervously talking to fill that silence. And in doing so, they will reveal their own hand, their own insecurities, and their own intentions.
It makes you look like a sphinx. Mysterious and powerful. Okay, what about Law 10, infection? Avoid the unhappy and unlucky.
This is all about emotional contagion. Greene argues that chronic misfortune is often self-inflicted, and, more importantly, it is highly catchy. There are certain people who just generate drama, misery, and failure wherever they go.
We all know someone like that.
And our instinct is often to try and help them. But Greene says if you attach yourself to them to try and save them, you will almost inevitably just get pulled down into their vortex. You have to ruthlessly cut them loose.
That is undeniably cold.
It is freezing cold. But remember the baseline premise of the book. This is about survival in a hostile court, not therapy.
Fair enough. Then we have Law 15, which sounds like it contradicts the Emperor Sung story. Law 15, crush your enemy.
It does sound like a contradiction, but it really depends on the specific nature of the enemy. The Sung story was about rivals who could be got. Law 15 applies to the irredeemable enemy. If someone truly hates you and you engage in a conflict, you cannot leave a single ember burning. If you show mercy and leave them only wounded, they will eventually recover, and they will spend the rest of their lives plotting revenge. You have to finish the job socially, professionally, or whatever the context is.
And finally, Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew.
The thumbscrew. It's a medieval torture device, but here it's a psychological metaphor. Greene argues that absolutely everyone has a fundamental weakness, an insecurity, a secret emotional need, a hidden gap in their psychological armor. That thumbscrew is your leverage point. Your job as an observer of power is to find it. Because once you find it, you can subtly press on it to move them however you wish.
Looking at all these together, there is a very clear recurring theme, isn't there? It is this constant idea of indirectness.
Yes, absolutely. We talked about the billiard ball bank shot earlier. Almost every single law in the book is about avoiding direct head-on confrontation. Look at Law 43, which literally says, work on the hearts and minds of others. You seduce people, you charm them, you maneuver them into position. You never just use brute force.
Because brute force creates immediate resistance.
Exactly. If I push you, you push back. It's physics. But manipulation, or let's use a softer word for the corporate world, influence. Influence creates willing compliance. They do what you want because they think it's their idea.
So as we wrapped up this deep dive, what does this all practically mean for us? For the listener who is commuting to work right now or sitting at their desk dealing with endless emails, how do they apply this?
I think it means we first have to fundamentally accept that these power dynamics are real and they are operating constantly. You might sit there and think, well, I'm not Louis XIV. I don't have a royal court, so this doesn't apply to me. But you do.
Your weekly department team meeting is a court?
Exactly. Your family dispute over the holidays is a court. The human dynamics of envy, deep insecurity, the need for power, the desire for reputation, these are permanently baked into our human nature. They don't go away just because we wear business casual and use laptops.
And you can certainly choose to completely ignore them.
You can. You can absolutely choose to be the innocent lamb. But as Greene starkly warns, the lamb is eventually eaten by the birds of prey. Or you can choose to study and learn the laws of the game.
Which is what we've started doing today. We learned that you absolutely need to stroke the master's ego. That was Law 1. Because if you make your boss feel fundamentally insecure, you are dead in the water, no matter how brilliantly talented you actually are.
And we learned that our closest friends can actually be our most dangerous liabilities in a business setting, while our sworn enemies can sometimes be manipulated into becoming our greatest assets. That was Law 2.
And taking a step back overall, we learned that blunt, unfiltered honesty is very often just a clumsy, ineffective weapon. Whereas deception, or as you phrased it, curated presentation, is a highly refined and necessary social skill.
It is all about cultivating deep awareness. It is about possessing the emotional control to look calmly at the chessboard of your life and actually see the next 3 moves before they happen, instead of just reacting to the piece that's currently moving.
I really want to leave the listener with one final provocative thought from the source material. We have spent this whole time talking about solid rules, specific actions, and concrete historical examples. But the very last law in the entire book, Law 48, is titled Assume Formlessness,
which Greene considers the ultimate final form of power.
The core idea there is that in a world where everyone around you is desperately trying to figure you out, they are trying to find your thumbscrew, they are watching to see if you are outshining them, they are plotting against you, the absolute best defense you can have is to be totally undefinable.
It echoes what Bruce Lee famously said, "Be water." If you take a rigid, solid shape, you can be targeted and you can be attacked. Your enemies know where to hit you. But if you are fluid, if you constantly adapt and change your shape to fit the immediate circumstances, no one can ever grasp you long enough to actually cause you harm.
So as you head back into your own personal court today, you have to ask yourself, are you a rigid stone just waiting to be eventually crushed by someone else? Or are you water? That is the ultimate question.
In navigating that question every single day is the game you cannot quit.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We will see you next time.
Watch your back out there.